Hey, welcome to the big picture with me and my man Chris Principe down. I think he's in, you never know where Chris is at. I think he's in Florida. He could be in New York. He could be in Vegas. We're just not sure, but we're going to assume right now that he's a man about town. He also could be in the Virgin Islands because we've been talking about St. Croix and the USVI for a couple of weeks here because it's very interesting considering the environment we are in now. I just saw the governor just put out because of the bill that was passed by the U.S. government in Congress that this is opening up some new opportunity hubs that are directly affect the Virgin Islands in a good way. So, Chris, our first you got to introduce yourself. And then we're going to get talking about some St. Croix, some merchant banking, things like that that could be exciting. So, what say you?
Hey, Grant, happy to be here. Great to see you. And yes, I'm Chris Principe, publisher of Financial IT, and I am home in my home office. So let's talk
Where's
a little
home
bit.
office?
Well, for today, it's down in South Florida for today. Yeah.
Nice, nice.
Grant, in the summer, I tend to travel just a little bit less. And in fact, what I like to say is I vacation at home because I travel so much.
Oh man, that's the beautiful part of being in South Florida. Lived there 30 years. Can always be on vacation. You never know what's going on. You know what? I'm going to go on vacation for about give me a couple hours. I'll be back. Because that's just how it is. You can always go to the beach and really enjoy some things, even in the hot and in the summer. But right now, especially early morning, nothing better than a walk on the beach. And speaking about beaches, thinking about tropical living. I want to ask you this, Chris, because St. Croix, when it comes to merchant banking, a lot of people feel that there is a clear advantage or maybe disadvantage, depending on how you look at it as. But if you could first define for us merchant banking and what merchant banking could look like in St. Croix as we build out the Caribbean presence for the U.S. So we talked about it last week about how this is taking place. How do you see this opportunity working out from a merchant banking standpoint? What that clear advantage could be for the Virgin Islands?
Well, Grant, really some excellent stuff there, and really exactly what I really like to talk about because I'm much more of a merchant banking guy than I am of a retail banking guy. So just to make the differences pretty simple, so that you can go to some smarter people than me, have much bigger definitions. But the simple definition is merchant banking is generally for corporate, for those things other than your personal banking. Retail banking is for your personal banking. So your checking account, your savings account, your 401k, whatever the things that you do with your particular relationship with your financial institution. While on the merchant banking side, we're dealing with everything that has to do with work, really. And that's the beauty of it. That's what I really like about merchant banking in general. So let's go back a little bit and let's talk about the region itself, because right now St. Croix, St. Vincent, St. John, the U.S. Virgin Islands really has a role that's going to just get more important going forward. But let's step back a little bit. Let's kind of look at the region and what's happened banking wise, right? So first, let's think about what are those places that we would consider banking, the banking capitals in the Caribbean, right? And I think most people, the first place that they would come in their minds would be the Cayman Islands, right? And the Cayman Islands has certainly an excellent financial reputation. It goes back decades, and kind of an interesting thing when we talk about the Cayman Islands. The expat financial community there is about 5,000 people, give or take, right? And while there is the Cayman dollar, and that's the currency of the Cayman Islands, those 5,000 expats plus some complementary people around them get their pay in US dollars. Okay, so it's kind of and I make this because it's a clear distinction about some things, you know, where, yeah, we love working in the Cayman Islands. We've got a great financial community here, and we provide good, strong financial services. But yeah, we're not trusting the Cayman dollar. Pay us in USD. Now, of course, what happens, it becomes a trickle down effect, right? So those people get paid in US dollars. So the people that do work for them, gardener, housekeeper, cook, you know, driver, whatever it is, they're paying those people in US dollars. So all of a sudden now we have US dollars circulating throughout the Cayman Islands in the system rather than the Cayman dollar. And I illustrate that point because it is a reality. You know, people don't move there without that getting paid in US dollars. But Grant, I know you know where I'm coming to, and here's the beauty of it. When we look at the US Virgin Islands as the up and coming financial center, it's already a USD, a US dollar denominated place of business. Okay, so one of the things that is a challenge in other areas of the Caribbean, it's already solved with the US Virgin Islands. It's a US dollar economy. It pays all in US dollars. All the accounts are US dollars. So if you want to attract expats from, I don't know, the UK, from the Asia, from Latin America, well, if they come to work in the US Virgin Islands, US dollar is what they're getting paid in. And the strength of the US dollar globally makes it probably the most acceptable currency out there. So I think in terms of being able to build that finance community, there's a leg up, so to speak, in that respect, that you don't have that challenge and have to do like we've seen the situation in the Cayman Islands has historically been. So Grant,
I like how you said that.
Yeah, you see, I kind of gave it a little history, which I like to do, and kind of moved it into the present and then passed that right into the future. So now when we talk about merchant banking, right? When, again, you think about that bigger picture and we look at the global economy for trade, right? So the business that countries everywhere do between each other, the business that corporations everywhere do between each other, right? More than 80% of that is all in US dollar, right?
Yeah.
The next 5 currencies only make up about another 15 or 16%, which would be the Chinese renminbi, the British pound, the euro, the Japanese yen, right? So we're looking at the US dollar just being so dominated. So again, when you come back to the US Virgin Islands, when we look at that to be a center for merchant banking, a center for trade, a center for global commerce, 80% of the more than 80% of the business in the globe is in US dollars. And yes, the US Virgin Islands, to answer that question for everyone, is a US dollar economy.
Oh, you said it all right there. Because, you know, if that's what the driving economic or financial force is the US dollar. People are there's an exchange rate, right? So you're moving between all these different currencies, whether you're in the Cayman Islands, you're in Bermuda, you're in Trinidad, Tobago, or something like that. Everyone still, you know, uses the US dollar as that gold standard. And to your point, if that gold standard is already present in the USVI, and now it is now a recognized partner within the CARICOM community, you know, that's there now by SETI case. And what we're looking to do is build out a actual merchant banking entity, you know, housed right there in Frederiksted. in St. Croix, and to then now be able to do business deals, investment banking deals, to have a stock exchange actually set up for the buying and selling of stocks and bonds and things of this nature. This becomes a critical factor. There comes that question like, well, why didn't they do this before? That is interesting. But because we were not really at the table of CARICOM, I think that might have something to do with it. We say, hey, here's a clear advantage here. Why aren't we utilizing it just like they do in the Cayman Islands or some other locations? But again, you don't have that that exchange rate problem because everything is already transacting in U.S. dollars and cents. So my question to you is, and this is a good question because people, I got to get an answer. Why wasn't this done before? Why are we doing it now? Why now is the question.
Well, Grant, excellent question. And the honest truth is it should have been done before. Okay. Now let's just go back to what we started with. So yeah, I think the Cayman Islands is recognized as a financial center globally for the Caribbean, right? But we'll look at some of the other places. You mentioned Bermuda, and Bermuda is a financial center, but it's really centered on the insurance and, more importantly, the reinsurance business. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say, well, what is reinsurance? Well, this is a location that's very favorable in Bermuda for insurance companies to insure themselves, which is reinsurance, right? So I'm an insurance company. I'm insuring people's cars on my books. I go to Bermuda and I go to a reinsurance company to insure my insurance. Make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
right? So Bermuda has that big advantage. That's not really what we would consider trade and merchant banking, although there is a lot of insurance. You have the travel insurance, you have shipping insurance, you have the insurance on funds, you have any number of insurance products that are part of or necessary for global trade and part of merchant banking, right? And then we look at, let's pick another place. So, Trinidad certainly is a strong center within the Caribbean, particularly because it's the only Caribbean island that has gas and oil reserves. And what's interesting about that, Grant, is that historically, oil has always been priced in dollars. So even though there's the TT dollar, the Trinidad and Tobago dollar, right, which is their currency in Trinidad and Tobago, they also have to convert their money into dollars one way or another, because the oil contracts themselves are already priced, bought and sold in US dollars, right? So it behooves a location like Trinidad and Tobago with their oil and gas reserves to be connected into that US dollar portion of global trade, which again is more than 80%. Now, in the recent years, we've actually seen for the first time oil not priced in US dollars. And the main deal that goes on there has been between Russia and China. And this started not 10 years ago, a little less, right? But it's been going for quite some time, certainly before the pandemic, where Russia was buying, was selling oil to China and accepting Chinese renminbi. So those oil contracts were not priced in US dollar, right? And there's a couple of other, but that is the rarity, right? That is the exception to the rule. So again, for a country like Trinidad, and now let me also bring Guyana in, because Guyana borders Venezuela. It's not an island, right? It's the only English-speaking country in South America, right? English is the national language. And Guyana has had oil reserves because it borders on Venezuela. By the way, Grant, which country in the world do you think has the number one of oil reserves globally out of all the countries we know that have oil? which country do you think has the largest oil reserves?
Don't tell me Guyana. No way.
No, no. I mean, I got to tell you, a lot of people would say Saudi Arabia, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia number 2. Venezuela is number 1.
Venezuela has that much oil?
Yep.
I know they had some oil. I didn't know they had that much.
They have that much. They have more confirmed oil reserves than Saudi Arabia, who's number 2, right? Guyana borders that. Okay, and that's
right.
It's been a bit of friction at times between Venezuela and Guyana because, of course, Venezuela doesn't want to think that Guyana is tapping into their oil reserves.
Yeah.
You know, you can understand that. In the meantime, though, Guyana has always had a situation where they've just never been able to really capitalize on those oil reserves. Going back into the late 70s and through the 80s, the main oil company there was Total, which is the French oil company, right? And they were never really successful in being able to bring any reasonable quantity to market. That has changed. And it's changed because Guyana has brought in other oil producers, some American companies, and they are now producing oil. They are projected to become, over the next few years, potentially in the top 10 of oil producing nations in the world. It is a game changer in Guyana, and we expect that game changing extends into the greater Caribbean.
Wow, that is huge knowledge. We need to understand that because of how the economy is shifting. We're going to go to a break and we're going to come back because you're bringing up some very, very good synergies between location. You're talking about economies of scale, and then what the play is for our presence of the U.S. through the U.S. Virgin Islands that could be critical. We'll go to break and then we'll come right back.
Sedicase efficacy chain, also known as chain of efficacy, a digital chain. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Educate, efficiency, effectiveness, and evolve. So whether you are doing market research, studying, doing market analysis, or making a critical financial decision, get the latest breaking, developing market news in the cryptocurrency markets at www.efficacycoin.com. Efficacy Cryptocurrency News is powered by Case Capital Markets. TravelShare. It Marketplace is an innovative, dynamic, user-friendly, and fully comprehensive global travel marketplace, featuring all Caribbean islands as a premier destinations. TravelShare. It Marketplace featured daily travel news, arts, culture, events, travel weather news, individuals' remote work, flex time, paid time off, family leisure time, and travel deals to better connect the U.S., Caribbean, and the Americas worldwide. So no matter where you want to travel in the world for work or leisure, working remotely or on vacation by yourself, with friends or family, whether by air or sea, TravelShare. It Marketplace makes it easy to get you to your destination. Book now at www.travelshare.com.
Reimagine a world where the Caribbean is seamlessly connected, where our people, our cultures, and our economies move freely across the islands. This is Connect Caribbean, more than a ferry service. It's the heartbeat of a new era, an era where economic opportunities expand, where trade flows freely across our seas, and cultural exchange flourishes. We are linking businesses, empowering communities, and reigniting the hope for a truly integrated Caribbean. Together, we're shaping a brighter, more unified future for the Caribbean. Connect Caribbean, connecting our islands, our people, our future.
Hey, Chris, we are back. Now, you started unpacking some very, very powerful new emerging financial opportunities when you're talking about South America, Guyana, Venezuela. You talked about the Caribbean with the Cayman Islands and Trinidad Tobago, or Bermuda, and Barbados, right? And then you talked about the USVI and the Virgin Islands as a presence already in the Caribbean from a merchant banking perspective that has a clear advantage that it already transacts in U.S. currency, which is great. Well, you mentioned the oil industry, and I want to talk because I just saw this on, I think it was either it was Business Week or something to that effect. It showed that tech is actually the new oil. They showed all the Magnificent Seven, which we talked about before, that these tech stocks are running the world right now. So it truly is the new oil, but you still need oil to run the computer systems, right? There's not, as far as I know, there's no other way of doing that. I want you to help us. Let's bring this home so people truly understand the opportunity of developing the merchant banking system within St. Croix that gives clear advantage internationally to businesses.
So Grant, let me just a little recap from what we just talked about, because what I'm doing is I'm going to be taking us on a little bit of a yellow brick road journey here so that we can come to the conclusion and the answer to that excellent question that you presented, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about the Cayman Islands as a financial center, right? We moved down to Trinidad and Tobago and then on to Guyana as a center for energy because of the oil and gas production, right? And now we want to move to the commercial space, right? So in the commercial space, you certainly have a lot of manufacturing in Trinidad. In fact, Trinidad has always been known not as a tourist-based economy. It's actually more of an industrial-based economy, right? But you look at Jamaica. Jamaica does a lot of production also. You look at the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic has a lot of factory and a lot of manufacturing also, right? And in fact, some might say that one of the things they are best at manufacturing is professional baseball players. Another topic.
That's funny. Okay, we will let you digress. Go right ahead.
We go on though to Puerto Rico, which also has had its times of not only manufacturing, but also as being the key transition point for shipments throughout the Caribbean. And we have to go back a couple of decades because that business has pretty much disappeared for them. But if you go back into the 80s and 90s, before, Puerto Rico was the transshipment point between the U.S. and the Caribbean and South America. So it was important in that respect, right? And you need all these things. So why talk about the banking community? Why do I talk about the industrial and oil producing capacities of Trinidad and Guyana, the commercial capacities of Jamaica, Trinidad again, the Dominican Republic, and then the transshipment point from Puerto Rico? Because as my yellow brick road has wound its way throughout the Caribbean, we come to the Emerald Castle, which is the U.S. Virgin Islands. And the reason I call it that is because all of the things we just talked about have been there, are there, and are being built there, right? So we have the financial capital, right? We have the U.S. denominated society that is tied into the U.S. economy, and we have the U.S. dollar that is the key currency throughout the Virgin Islands, right? So we're already there as far as currency goes, right? We looked at oil and oil production. Well, the U.S. Virgin Islands had the oil refinery for decades, and we understand that that will be coming back online in the near future. So now we have a place where Trinidad, Guyana, maybe Suriname, maybe things changing in Venezuela, maybe there's a new location can actually facilitate their oil production through the U.S. Virgin Islands, right? And we talk about the Commerce Center. Well, right now there's a lot of legislation going on to build that economy into the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands is really blessed with a couple of key things. You know, there's in St. Croix, there's an amazing airport, and what's really and being blind, think about it's adjacent to a natural deep water harbor, which is now being built out to be able to increase the usage and transshipment of goods. Warehouses is in place and it's expanded. And it's almost like here's the airport, here's the port, here's factories and warehousing. It's just logically a logistics center point, right? Because one of the things in logistics is you want to be able to move products, and you have to, right? So whether it's oil or it's fruits and vegetables, or you need to move those with the shortest amount of movements in the shortest space, right? And you're able to quickly take things off a ship and put them on a plane, you know, same day, within hours, literally. You can do that. And particularly for the fresh food products that come out of the Caribbean, this is obviously going to be a key thing. Along with that, you have a deep water harbor where maintenance for U.S. Navy, for the U.S. Coast Guard, for other merchant vessels, all can go on right there. You don't have to take a ship that needs maintenance, repair, or has been damaged to some other major place outside of the Caribbean. St. Croix, that's the Emerald City when we talk about these things. And now we're talking about merchant banking there. So merchant banking, in my view, is the thread that ties all this together, because you can't do any of this if we aren't moving money, right? People need to get paid and people need to pay. Merchant banking steps right in. And to support your merchant banking, you need a strong capital market, right? You need an economy-based capital market that is going to allow for financing to go on. It's going to allow for investment to go on. It's going to allow for companies to take advantage of their growth and success by being on a stock exchange. This is in process also right now, Grant, and we'd love to see it just be an extension of what Wall Street is doing. And
this is important.
Yeah, my final little cap piece to that is something we've talked about before, which is so many of my fellow New Yorkers who dominate Wall Street. I mean, the real movers and shakers, many of them have their second home already in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And a big reason for that is it's domestic travel. Your U.S. passport grants you the ability to go back and forth those places without having to show anything more than your driver's license, as if you're flying from Miami to New York. Very key.
Oh, that's key. I mean,
we just got to get it moving a little bit further. We're just about there, Grant. So, Grant, let's go down that road.
Well, we're gonna go down that road. I mean, we gotta go and maybe we gotta invite some of your New York buddies, you know, as they fly over you in Miami and they're on their way to another location, to not just take their bodies down to St. Croix and enjoy the beautiful weather and the beautiful beaches, but to actually bring their beautiful money, right? Well, we just talked about the big, beautiful bill, right? Let's utilize that opportunity. We got opportunity hubs that are available in St. Croix. You have a hub zone that is there that you can actually move money through St. Croix and not just as a pass through. I think that's what it's been used for traditionally. It's a pass through. You pass it through, you get huge breaks from a tax perspective, but it's not directly affecting the local economy. Like they're not directly investing in the small businesses that are there, that are all connected somehow. And you just brought it up with the oil industry. This is a huge refinery right there on St. Croix that's totally underutilized. But if we can get that back online, you get the shipping. Like I said, deep water port. One thing I learned, which I didn't even realize, one of the deepest trenches in the world are right there, in St. Croix. So you can do a lot, whether it's underwater, submarine, or this and that, that they could be utilized. So there's a lot of U.S. regulated local exchange for deal flow. It's what I'm looking for, deal flow from private equity to venture debt or infrastructure finance that can be done. There's still a lot of damage that occurred during some of the hurricanes of the last decade that are still impacted. They need to build out a new infrastructure for healthcare, a new hospital system. What can that look like? That's one of the biggest problems that when you're on a small island, if you have a serious healthcare situation going on, you're gonna have to fly back typically to the U.S. mainland for assistance. Now, let's change that. There's opportunity to build this out to be a better location, have better infrastructure, to have better services that are available for everybody. So now let's open up the door. Let's open up the opportunity and understanding the competitive edge that makes St. Croix specifically so different. Now you are what I would call a financer, meaning you understand money, you understand the attitude of money, you understand the motivation of money. And I think to your point, a lot of this is, are you aware of this? Are you considering this? And then can you go ahead and close on this? We want to make it easier from a SETI case perspective, to make it easy for you to close, that we de-risk the situation all the way around, as you talked about earlier, that windy path that sometimes take place. Let's make that more a straighter path of certainty, that you understand a clear return on investment, a clear road to not only financial impact, but social impact on the island, where everybody can then participate and have access to this kind of deal flow and capital through the merchant banking system. There's another thing that's coming up, which I want you to, if you could, shed a little bit of light on Connect Carib. There's a ferry that's being developed, implemented, and there's a reason for that. So now you get back to that shipping world that you were talking about. Kind of unpack if we now launch shipping out of St. Croix, have this ferry type service to move product, service to, as you pointed out, you can move money, now you can move supplies back and forth, because a lot of these islands have short supply, but now you have a strong financial backing and a strong trade route, let's say. This could be impactful. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Well, Grant, I mean, you just brought up so many different wonderful things, and some things that are not so wonderful. And, I may start off with so much of what we've talked about and so much of what we've seen in the Caribbean that has been good for the economies and that has been good for industry and has been good for banking has not filtered down to the local residents. And this is a big issue, because it's their homes, and they should benefit when there is benefit in the region, right?
Yeah. So
when we talk about some of that, you bring up healthcare, and healthcare, of course, is critical. And I think, particularly in the U.S., people take so much of that for granted. Yes, we complain about the cost. Yes, we complain about the doctors and sending us to other doctors, and that we have the best medical care in the world. And I can tell you that because I've been to 126 countries, and I've had to have, my share of some experiences in this, right? And what we don't realize is just what you said. If you have a significant health issue in the Caribbean, in many of these places, your alternative really is to fly to the U.S., right? And if you actually go back back to the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, right? From South America, I mean, the continent, many people who had the money and needed the health care would go to Cuba, which had outstanding health care for a long time. And it's a very interesting, Grant. What do you think is the #1 export from Cuba today?
Cigars.
And I like a good Cuban cigar, right? It's a significant contributor. It's not the #1 export. The #1 export from Cuba today is medical care to the rest of the world, particularly a lot of African nations benefit from Cuban doctors being sent there. Yeah. It's a huge and necessary, I'll say, necessary business, because a doctor in the U.S. Look, they're making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year and living good lives. A doctor in Cuba who could be as skilled or even more, is on a government salary, which something like this. So they lend them out, and the government gets paid for exporting those doctors to places in need. And when we go to places in need, let's go to something else that I picked up that you said earlier, which is the growth of fintech and how fintech is the new economic oil. And I think that's very true, right? And I think we're seeing that in so many places. And one of the greatest resources we have in the Caribbean is the people. We have people that are motivated to work. We have people that like education. We have people that are excited to be innovative. And that is everything you need for the fintech world. It could be the greatest resource we have is people in fintech in the Caribbean. That needs to be developed. But I like to see, and I like to think of fintech as being a resilient fintech, right? So what do I mean by that? I mean, fintech should contribute to everybody's daily lives in a way that makes their lives more resilient. So, you got health tech, right? So fintech for health is financial tech. You got health tech for health. All the things need to come together, and technology needs to improve people's lives and needs to make things more resilient. And unfortunately, we just had a tragedy in Texas with the flash flooding, and what's gone on there is certainly terrible. And the Caribbean is susceptible to many major weather events. So by being economically more strong, by having technology being a big contributor to the region, we should be able to make the region more resilient to these health events. I mean, these weather events, right? And that resiliency comes in the form of, let's come back to banking, how to move money. Because when you have a crisis, when you have a weather event that is negatively impactful on a people, a region, a country, an area, money is the big solution. Money for goods to come in, for help to come in, for medical care to come in, for temporary living quarters, things as basically as water. Because again, when people from the US and let's say Europe and Asia and others don't really understand the difference that we have in an island, right? In other words, if it's not on the island, you have to import it, right? And island, just by its nature, are not huge. Okay, Australia might be an exception. Greenland might be another exception. They're huge, right? But islands are generally not huge and generally have just certain natural resources. So being able to get those products and services at a crisis moment is very critical. Money moves that, right? And
Chris, we got to go to a quick break. We're going to come back because this is important. Now we're talking about life-saving measures and then really how to mitigate and be resilient in these islands. So let's go to break. We're going to come back and we're going to finish up on those thoughts. Thank you.
In today's fast-paced financial landscape, access to capital is the key to success. At the heart of this revolution is Case Capital Markets, powered by SETI-CASE. Here, innovation and investment converge, creating a dynamic environment where businesses can thrive and reach new heights. Introducing Grant McGaw, the Senior Advisor at Case Capital Markets. Grant is a visionary leader, dedicated to connecting businesses with institutional capital and strategic funding. His expertise opens doors to game-changing investment opportunities, making him an invaluable partner for companies looking to scale and succeed in the competitive world of finance. With an impressive 25 years in technology, 9 years in healthcare, and 6 years in investment banking, Grant McGaw has a proven track record. He has successfully closed over $500 million in high-value transactions, seamlessly bridging technology, healthcare, and infrastructure with innovative financial solutions. His experience is a testament to his ability to drive success. Case Capital Markets offers businesses direct access to over 32,000 venture capital firms, private equity funds, family offices, and institutional investors. This network empowers mid-market companies with under $100 million in revenue to scale beyond their limits, unlocking unprecedented growth potential. Debt, equity, growth capital, public offerings. These are the building blocks of the future of capital access. Whether you're scaling a business, seeking investment, or exploring market expansion, Grant McGaw is your trusted partner. Together, you can unlock capital and create long-term financial success. The future belongs to those who take action. Are you ready to elevate your business?
Oop, let's make sure we are, you can hear me. I say, Chris, we have been laying it down. I mean, this is wonderful information. We have gone around the archipelago talking about the advantage, not just for the U.S. Virgin Islands and St. Croix, but the entire region and also South America as it works from South America to the Caribbean, to the U.S. Virgin Islands, to the U.S. mainland, how this all is working together and how we can get local benefit specifically into the region, into St. Croix of itself and the rest of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Here are the critical questions that I would like for you. I want you to put on your investor lens, your finance lens. What does an investor need, given all this information, all of the good, the bad, and what could go wrong? We want to de-risk some of that, but what does an investor need to see next before they sign the first deal, in your opinion?
Well, Grant, I mean, two things. One, they want to see stability, and in their view, stability means return, right? So they invest X number of dollars, and they're seeing consistently returns that are reasonable for what they're looking to risk in terms of their investment, right? So that and they need structure, right? So they need to see that there's structure in place that will do that. And you know, I kind of feel a little neglectful because, you know, your last lead into me, I didn't finish with the answer to your question, but I was getting there, Grant. I really was.
Well, good. Take your time. Go ahead. I tip my hat to you.
Okay, so, you know, just to recap, we went through the financial centers, Grand Cayman, Bermuda. We went through the oil of Trinidad and Tobago and also with Guyana. We went through commercial, which is, you know, be Trinidad and Jamaica and the Dominican Republic. We went through the movement of goods that where Puerto Rico was. Don't let my wife hear that because I didn't mess up Puerto Rico. No. Okay. So we move on to that. And where we're coming around to is what is, and we started talking about resiliency in fintech, resiliency in technology, and how that can benefit the region. But where I was coming around to in my long-winded way was one of the key missing components that you touched upon and was your question, which is the intermodal transportation throughout the Caribbean, right? And when we say intermodal, we mean different ways of moving products, right? Whether it's by air or by boat. There isn't a trucking option because there's not bridges connecting all the islands, right? That's a bit impractical. So it's mainly by air and by boat. And we have air service throughout the region, okay? But that's passenger driven. And might I say it's tourism driven, right? It's not commercially driven, although there is a cargo space and there are cargo flights that go on. But you can't ship everything by air because of the cost and expense. And some things are just too big, too bulky, and too heavy. So you need to go on ships. And what's really happened in the Caribbean is we've lost that over the centuries, actually. I mean, if we go back to the 1700s, for instance, when you might say that the rulers of the Caribbean were pirates, or let's say, you know, illegal shipping ventures, right? You know, there was a lot of interconnection between all the islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands at that time wasn't the U.S. Virgin Islands, of course, it was Dutch, right? But it was also a center point for shipping, and we need to come back to that. And one of the things that is a big bright spot, and one of the things really uplifting my heart and my view of the region, is the introduction of Carib Connect, which will be the new shipping venture that goes on between the Caribbean islands. There is so much business that can be done between islands, and today we're not able to facilitate it because we can't move the goods from, say, the Dominican Republic down to Trinidad, from products produced in Puerto Rico, you know, out to Aruba, you know, and so on. So if you look at the Caribbean, you can see so many connection points. And I'm really pleased that with Carib Connect, that they're going to be initiating service. It's imminent now. The sources I hear tell me that they have their first ship on its way to be able to launch and initiate this brand new service. They'll initially start a service that'll go between a couple of key points, but one of the key points is going to be the U.S. Virgin Islands. It will be the key transshipment point. And that's because there's certain legislation on the books unique to the U.S. Virgin Islands that will allow goods to go in and out of the Caribbean and the U.S. in a more seamless manner, right? So, Grant, to answer your question earlier about the shipping and to tell you a little bit about Carib Connect, that's pretty much where we are. I think we're going to see the launch of that service in the next 30 to 60 days. Maybe they'll surprise us and be sooner, but once that's launched, they'll start moving, and it'll be a ferry service. But don't think about a ferry service as, you know, a pleasure boat cruise. Don't think about a ferry service as, you know, we see a lot of places connected by ferries that carry cars. This will be ferry service that is cargo forward. It will accommodate passengers, tourists even. It will accommodate vehicles, for instance, at times, but it is a cargo forward service. That's the main thing. So now I can finally wrap a bow around this and tell you that the next piece that's going to be critical to this is where we started, Grant, merchant banking. So when you have goods and products that you need to move different places, to have the ability to finance those movements, to prepay invoices, to discount invoices, to be able to move that money more efficiently, more services, guess who does that? It's us on the merchant banking side. The U.S.
That makes
Virgin
perfect sense. Yeah.
and the U.S. Virgin Islands will be the center for that.
Now you've connected everything together. You have this merchant bank, and it functions, and actually you have the goods and services that are flowing physically, you know, through the port there, through a Connect Carib, right? And what that's looking like. And then you can start getting other deal flow, because now you have connectivity, you have communication, you have needs, right? If you have a demand and a supply, now you're moving things around. Now everybody wins. That's the whole point. Nobody loses, right? Right? So you're only competing against the status quo. Can we get above the status quo, start doing something that's more inventive, more creative, more innovative, start utilizing all these different things? And I'm going to let our audience know next week, we're going to be talking about stable coins, because now you start to see some other things that are taking place when it comes to, you know, financial banking, and what that really is going to look like when you have something that everybody agrees upon is valuable, and you can start utilizing it, and it has, to your point, you know, a lot less risk when it gets involved. We've talked about this in the past. It's so important as an individual island, there's a lot of risk when it comes to, you know, what the value of the banking system is. When you look at it holistically and everybody is involved holistically, it can be a better vehicle for everybody. And I like that going forward. So that's going to be our lead in, you know, definitely for next week. So Chris, are you going to be ready to talk about stable coins as you already elaborately talked about merchant banking?
Well, Grant, just two things to wrap up. I have two things to wrap up with. First, just to close off your last question, which was about investors. Okay, by wrapping the bow around the whole thing, we now present a stable, key thing for investors, structured, also very interesting for investors, place to be able to comfortably make returns on their money, right? And you injected what will be the newest elixir of wealth, which is going to be stable coins. Okay. Right now, when I've been going to events, of course, everything at all the events that I go to, the number one thing you hear everywhere is AI, right? And artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence and, you know, machine learning and all these things. Okay. But since the beginning of the year, creeping into May and June, what I'm hearing more and more at the events now is stable coins. And what's really interesting for me, it's not a fintech play. It's not a fintech discussion. It's not a fintech promotion. The banks themselves are talking about it. The banks are now talking about stable coins, and even better, Grant, central banks are talking about it. So
Mm.
it means that this conversation now that stablecoins has reached the point where they will be contributors and they will be components of our financial system going forward. Stay tuned because we got a lot to bring you on that.
Oh man, we're going to bring this thing home. This has been wonderful. Chris, I encourage the entire audience. We've got about 10 different shows that we've done already. We're demystifying a lot of things that a lot of people like have trouble getting a lot of clarity around, like what is this? So we're kind of breaking this down and into a consumable, if you might, consumable framework in communication between Chris. Chris, he's been to 128 countries. He travels extensively to understand in this financial IT world. And he has a beautiful publication that constantly comes out. And I encourage everybody to go to Financial IT. Is that financialit.com? Help me understand where they can find all this information.
Grant, financialit.net. And on our website, we have a multimedia approach to anything in fintech. We really have structured ourselves since 2012 as the voice of technology providers to the banks, governments, and corporations. And it's been a blast, Grant, and it's just growing.
I love it. So we're going to conclude here. We'll see you next week where we're going to be talking about stablecoins. Take care.
Great.